deal which will, if anything, allow our companies and our exporters to do even more business with our European friends.
So the question of the day, is Brexit safe?
I will deliver on its promise.
There'll be food shortages. It's complete and utter rubbish. It's Project Fear Mark II. It should be utterly, completely, totally disregarded.
Brexit is and was and will be a total disaster.
Brexit is doing the economy real damage.
Brexit, as negotiated, is frankly a disaster.
Are you absolutely sure that there will be no shortages of fresh food in this country as a result of no deal?
Everyone will have the food they need.
Saying a new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol is coming. Conservative MPs have been told to make sure they're at the House of Commons on Monday. The DUP has warned that the deal must be right. Leadership. To debate this, I am joined by the Conservative MP for Wokingham, Sir John Redwood, and leader of the Rejoin EU party here in the studio, Richard Hewison. John, can you please, thank you for joining us firstly, but please can you shed a bit of light? Is this deal imminent?
I have no proof that it is. I don't know who's got the story that we're all on some special request to be in Parliament on Monday. We have the usual three-line whip for Monday for the normal business, but it doesn't say anything about the publication of a text or the approval of a new deal. I see all sorts of conflicting stories in the press, briefed by various people, but the things that ministers and the Prime Minister have been saying very clearly throughout last week is that they do not yet have a deal, they are still in negotiation, and that they fully understand that their deal has to tackle the democratic deficit issue, which is most crucial to the Unionists in Northern Ireland.
And how do they get there? Because the DUP have made it very clear that they have 7 tests. Do you believe that Rishi Sunak will be able to square that circle?
Well, I hope he can. I wish him every success. I think he's made a lot of progress in persuading the EU that this is a problem caused by the EU. The EU have upset the Unionist community. The EU have taken a very lopsided or indeed wrong interpretation of the Northern Ireland Protocol and are trying to insist on it against the law of the Protocol itself. The Protocol starts by making very clear that the Good Friday Agreement has to take precedence in all respects. And the Good Friday Agreement makes crystal clear that nothing major can happen in Northern Ireland without the approval of both communities. And it is also very clear that the Unionist community has never consented to the idea that Northern Ireland should have to accept EU laws when the rest of the country, GB, does not have to accept them anymore because we have left the EU. And so the EU is disrupting the protocol. It's obviously in dispute with the Unionist community, and I hope they will listen very carefully to the Unionist community and calm things down, because we want the Good Friday Agreement to be upheld. We would like to see the Unionists back at Stormont, and they can't go there all the time the EU is this provocative.
Now, Richard, you would very much like to see us back in the European Union. Would you accept that the EU has been ever so slightly difficult when it comes to these negotiations?
No, I wouldn't accept that at all. And in fairness to John, he doesn't know what's been going on in the negotiations over the weekend, which he freely admits, and yet he blames the EU for it. I would like to actually see what comes out of the negotiations before doing so. But I have to say, in many ways, Emily, I feel that we're back in April 2015, right at the start of our debate. And I would just remind people...
Because you're still asking for us to rejoin.
Well, to be frank, we haven't really left yet with the Northern Ireland Protocol in place and goods flowing freely through Dover and through the border into Belfast. So it would be argued that Brexit has been done, I think, is a false thing to actually say. But let's remind ourselves what the issue with Brexit is. And let's be honest with ourselves here. For Brexit to succeed, one of 3 things has to happen. Either Ireland has to leave the EU, which we know is not going to happen, or we have to have a firm border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or a firm border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And I think John would accept that both of those are incredibly unlikely to actually happen. We have this shabby compromise at the moment with the Northern Ireland Agreement, where effectively and I can understand to a certain extent why Unionists are very upset with that, because it does put an artificial divide between Northern Ireland and the rest of GB. And based on what we heard leaked in the papers of the Red Channel, the Green Channel, I'm not surprised that that's fallen down in flames, if that's what's indeed happened in these negotiations, because I think the DUP would be right to point out, it's another shabby compromise that does nothing actually to deliver what we were promised in the Brexit debate. And that's why I feel we're just going back to 2015. We need to move forward with some reasonable solution.
Oh, John, you were shaking your head there.
Yes, I don't accept those are the options at all. The United Kingdom has always said that we see no need to impose new border controls between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And we've also offered to enforce EU rules and law on any exports going from Northern Ireland to the Republic. And it would be up to the Republic to decide how they handle their side of the border, but they can quite easily do that without any new border controls at the border. You use trusted trader schemes, you use the normal enforcement mechanisms at the warehouses and farms before the goods are dispatched or at the place where they are delivered to in the usual way. And there's been a long history of cooperation between the UK and the Republic of Ireland when we were in the EU to stop smuggling. Because, of course, there was a VAT border and an excise border between the two in those days because we had different VAT and excise arrangements, but we didn't enforce them at the border post. There wasn't a border post. We enforced them in the way I've been describing. And that's exactly how we could carry on enforcing any other differences as the UK diverges from European law.
Well, there you go, Richard. It's not beyond the wit of man.
Well, I have to say, I'm quite surprised to hear John say there about being willing to enforce EU rules on goods going into Ireland, because that doesn't sound like Brexit at all to me. And indeed, if John's considering changing parties and would like to join us, that sounds like exactly the sort of thing we're pushing for. And this is not Brexit. If you want Brexit, you promised us a complete separation from the European Union. And the point I would put to you is that is proving more and more impossible to deliver. Now, I offer a very simple solution. Let's forget the whole thing and rejoin the EU, which is what the majority of the population now show in polls they want.
Well.
Now, I would just say kindly, you've now had coming up to 8 years to solve this problem. Now, either solve it, John, or admit it's not solvable. One of the two. I think we're running out of patience.
John, I heard a little murmur, a grumble under your breath there.
Yes, well, that's just a silly debating point, which is not in reality at all. Of course, when you trade with another state under World Trade Organization rules, or in this case it would be under the EU Free Trade Agreement, there is enforcement on both sides of the border of the appropriate rules. And so it is part of normal trade that states cooperate with each other against the smuggling of illicit goods, whether they be unsafe goods or whether they be goods trying to fiddle the tax arrangements or whatever it may be. That is still a free trade model where you don't have to surrender your sovereignty to the other country. But there is mutual enforcement to ensure a fair and free and legal trade. And these silly points about how the answer to everything is to go back into the EU. I mean, by what means? And are you so undemocratic that having denied the result of our biggest ever democratic vote, you then just want to take us back
John,
in
I
without
literally lead a Democratic Party that stands in elections.
Anyway,
so how can you call the Democratic Party undemocratic?
We've got less than a minute left, so I just want to get a quick word on you on what we were supposed to be talking about initially, which is, should the Commons and the Lords get a say on whether we get rid of EU laws? John?
Yes, they are. And what a difference between the way those laws were introduced when we had thousands of EU laws forced upon us, where there was either no debate in the Commons at all, or the minister would have a perfunctory short debate and say, it doesn't matter what you think about this, you can't vote it down, you can't amend it, this is the EU law, and it's already happened. Whereas now, every single law is subject to a parliamentary process if Parliament wants. And we are currently having this big debate about a major act of Parliament to expedite it, which Parliament can either accept or not accept or amend as it sees fit. The point was we couldn't amend any of those laws when they came in.
Quick word.
Well, I'm glad to hear John accept the responsibilities of Parliament there. There are now 3,800 laws that are just going to disappear without parliamentary scrutiny if Rishi Sunak gets his way. We elect Parliament to actually do some work on our behalf, not just stuff their faces on taxpayer-subsidised lunches all day. And getting through 3,800 laws by the end of December should not be beyond the wit of man. And I'm glad John acknowledges that as well. And I hope John, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems will all force Mr Sunak to take his responsibilities seriously. seriously as well.
Well, thank you very much.
You shouldn't mislead people into thinking that we're ever intending to scrap all 3,800 laws, but we are.
Well, that's what's going to happen, John, on December 31st.
Anyway, unfortunately,
do something about them, and you know that.
Parliamentary democracy. You just don't.
And
like
I
the
look
fact
forward
that
to
the
seeing
majority
parliamentary
disagrees with you.
democracy in place. I look forward to seeing the people we send there doing some work and dealing with each and every one of those laws that's coming up for sunset.
Vote Rejoin EU. Join the EU vision.